The infectious disease I chose to research this semester is malaria. The name malaria originates from the Italian language, and it can be broken down into two separate words, mala and aria, which in English translate to bad air. And this came from the early belief that malaria was caused by breathing in the air by stagnant bodies of water or drinking swampy water. The common nicknames include agu, jungle fever, marsh fever, and paludism, and these names come from the symptoms of the disease and what was believed to be the original cause of the disease. Plasmodium is the genus of malaria. Plasmodia are considered protozoa. There are dozens of species of Plasmodium that infect a variety of species such as lizards, rodents, and birds in addition to humans. The species that infect humans are Plasmodium falciparum, Vivax, ovale, malariae, and knowlesi. Of these, falciparum is the most prevalent and deadly and can cause death within 24 hours if left untreated. The life cycle of malaria includes two hosts, one vertebrate and one insect. Once inserted into the vertebrate host via an insect, the parasite will move through the bloodstream to the liver, where it will mature and eventually rupture, releasing merozoites into the bloodstream, and these will infect erythrocytes. And this is kind of the point at which the host will exhibit clinical signs and symptoms of infection. And the two stages of the malaria infection in the vertebrate host are known as the exoerythritic cycle in the liver and the erythrocytic cycle in the bloodstream. Once in the bloodstream of the vertebrate host, the parasite is then able to be picked up by the insect host when feeding. Once in the insect, the parasite will invade the gut and multiply, and they will eventually rupture and move into the salivary glands of the insect and can be transmitted into another vertebrate host while feeding. And the malaria cycle in the insect is known as the sporogonic cycle. So malaria has a very extensive history. It can be traced back as far as 1550 BC to the ancient Egyptians. It additionally was described by the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates around the year 400 BC and appeared annually during the autumn. The disease originated in Africa, but eventually moved its way into southern Europe, most likely due to ecological changes. Here I have three images of people who are important in the research and study of malaria. Alphonse Leverin was a French doctor, and he was the first to describe the parasite and propose it as the cause of malaria. He saw that the red blood cells contained specific parasitic elements that caused the illness in the host. In the center is Sir Ronald Ross, a British bacteriologist who studied and described the complete life cycle of the malaria parasite, and he additionally was the first to discover that malaria was spread by mosquitoes after finding the parasite in the stomach of a bird. And finally, on the lower right is Giovanni Grassi, an Italian physician who, with some colleagues, discovered the parasite for human malaria in a mosquito. The malaria parasite is very dependent on its host for its nutrients and all amino acids that are needed for growth. It sources its amino acids by digesting the hemoglobin of the infected red blood cells. And it consumes nutrients at a much faster rate than its host cell, and so it increases the permeability of the host cell to more nutrients so it can grow faster. And it also creates new permeation pathways and uses glycolysis and the pentose phosphate pathways as the primary source of carbon metabolism. The infected erythrocytes have a PPP that is 78 times more active than uninfected erythrocytes, which demonstrates how fast the parasite grows. Prevention methods for malaria are targeted at two aspects: vector control and pharmaceutical-based. And the image on the right shows one method of vector control, which is insecticide-treated nets, which is a more affordable option than some of the pharmaceutical treatments for poorer areas. In addition to this, there have been several vaccines in clinical development, 2 approved for children under the age of 5, and the first vaccine ever to receive a recommendation from WHO was only recently in 2021. In addition to this, access to clean water sources is an important prevention method to stop the spread of malaria. Malaria is only spread by mosquito vectors. The parasite is inserted through the saliva, and the most common vector is a female Anopheles mosquito. Malaria cannot be transmitted through contact and is not contagious. In very rare circumstances, it can be transmitted by sharing needles or blood transfusion. So the diagnosis of malaria is primarily based on clinical tests. Microscopic examination is the best way to confirm a diagnosis. Microscopic examination is when the patient's blood sample is taken and viewed just under a microscope, and it only takes a few hours to confirm a diagnosis. In addition to this, microscopic examination can also identify the species of malaria. The rapid diagnostic test is another way to confirm a diagnosis, and it identifies malaria antigens in the blood sample of the patient, but it can only identify the species of one type of malaria. And although this test is faster than microscopic examination, it is not used as much because the species of malaria is necessary the species of malaria needs to be known in order to treat the patient. Molecular detection is another diagnosis method, and it uses the polymerase chain reaction, but it has a lengthy time period required and is again not used as commonly. As I said in the previous slide, the treatment for malaria should not be administered until the species is known. Falciparum and Knowlesi are very fast-acting and severe species, and if a patient is infected with either of these species, treatment should be administered immediately. However, if a patient has Vivax or Ovale, the patient also needs to be treated for hypnozoites, which lay dormant in the liver and can reoccur or cause relapses if not treated properly. And the most common anti-malarial drugs include chloroquine phosphate and artemisinin-based combination therapies. The signs and symptoms of malaria include fever, chills, headaches, nausea, vomiting, muscle aching, and fatigue. And these symptoms tend to appear about 7 to 30 days after being bitten. This is the incubation period of the parasite. And some types of malaria can remain dormant within the body for as long as a year. So, the malaria parasite induces both the humoral and cellular responses when it is in the liver and in the bloodstream. So the immune response generated in the liver is the formation of antibodies against the surface proteins on the pathogens. These trap sporocytes and prevent the invasion and infection of other cells, of other liver cells. But this immune response tends to be inefficient, and the bloodstream immune response is the release of cytokines, which induce inflammation and other symptoms of the disease. And these cytokines can additionally enhance the phagocytic and killing abilities of macrophages. The malaria parasite is difficult for the host to target because of the parasite's characteristics. Sequestration is one of those characteristics, and it's the process of infected blood cells collecting together in small blood vessels and tissues, which cause complications. And antigenic variation is the reason the immune response of the liver tends to be ineffective, and this is because the parasite is able to change their surface proteins in order to evade immune responses. Polymorphism is another characteristic that helps the parasite avoid immune detection, and it just refers to the different morphological variations of the parasite throughout its life cycle. In 2023, the estimated number of malaria cases worldwide was about 263 million, and of those there were about 597,000 deaths. The WHO African region is responsible for the vast majority of cases and deaths. It is responsible for 94% of cases and 95% of deaths. The populations most at risk for malaria are pregnant women, children under the age of 5, and people with weakened immune systems. In all of these instances, the people have a weakened or not fully developed immune system, which makes them susceptible. Of the 569,000 deaths that occur in the African region, 76% are children under the age of 5. In addition to this, regions that have high amounts of poverty or face geographical, or financial barriers are also more at risk for malaria, just because it is more difficult for them to access treatment and care. Eradication efforts are currently underway to reduce malaria cases and deaths. And in the graph on the right, the blue graph shows the decrease in malaria case incidence, and below that in pink shows the decrease in the mortality rate of malaria. There is some slight concern for the disease reemerging, as there has been a few cases in the U.S. That have arisen and are not the result of travel outside the U.S. And that's it. Thank you.